Hello, my name is Josh Juarez. I'm an 11th grader at Fort Atkinson High School. I've been reenacting since about 5th grade. I'm with Company K of the 2nd Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. That's a unit of the Iron Brigade, so obviously I'm a Civil War reenactor if you haven't figured that out already. So we are a unit of the Iron Brigade, which was made up of 5 different units, 3 from Wisconsin, 1 from Michigan, and the final from Indiana. Now, I'm here today to talk to you about my uniform and everything I've got here with me. I brought a few different things. I'm not sure how well you guys can see the table, but I'll be holding it up in just a few minutes to show you everything. First, we're going to start by talking about the uniform that I'm wearing. The most important piece that you probably noticed immediately was the hat that I'm wearing, because it's very distinct and it's significant a lot to the Iron Brigade. So these were called a black hat or a hardy hat. Most people refer to the Iron Brigade soldiers as the Black Hats, or in some cases, those damn black hats. If you're a Confederate soldier, they didn't like you very much because they were some of the toughest fighters, and they were integral on the first day of Gettysburg to holding the forces back. So they were a very big part in that. But here, we'll talk about what the hardy hat is and what makes it so special and significant. Other units would wear this hat, but nobody else wore it like the Iron Brigade did. So the most important things about it are the side, which is folded up. This is always folded up on the left side, and there's actually a reason to this, which I'll talk about later. It has to do with the way that the soldiers would hold the rifle so that it doesn't run into the brim of the hat. We'll discuss that in a little while. Let's talk more about the features of the hat. So holding it up on this side is an American Eagle brass pin, which is just a military issue. And then on the front, the three very important things are your insignia and then this hat cord, which symbolize a few different very important things. The hat cord, here you can see it, hopefully you can see over the camera, is blue. Now, blue would stand that you're in the infantry, you're an infantry soldier. If you had a red cord, you would be an artilleryman. If you had a yellow cord, you would be in the cavalry. Now the K and the 2, as I said earlier, I'm a member of the 2nd Wisconsin, which is where the 2 comes from, and a member of Company K, which is why the K is on there. Now, insignia is very important because if a soldier were to go down or lost track of his unit, you need to be able to be identified. If you're wounded, you may not remember where you came from, so you need someone else who can tell where you're from and how you did things and where your unit might be so that they can get you back there safely or notify if you were killed in battle or missing or anything like that. They need to be able to notify them, so that's why insignia were so important. Now, so like I said, these black hats were worn by almost every soldier in the Iron Brigade. That doesn't mean that these are the only hats that soldiers wore in the Civil War. The more common hat would be the forage cap or the kepi. Now, I don't have either of those with me here today, but those are a much more common, and they're like a low back hat, and they would be the dark blue to match this coat rather than black. Now, they would still share the same insignia as this hat does. Because like I said, that's vital to any soldier to be able to figure out where they came from and identify them. So that's all there is to talk about with the hat, so I'll just put that back on. And then we'll go next to the sack coat, which is what I'm wearing right here. And that's the name for this coat because you can see that it has 4 buttons. This is very common for a standard infantryman. It's probably the most common coat throughout the entire military on both sides. It is also referred to as the fatigue blouse. It's just another name for it. So I'll unbutton it here so you guys can see the inside of it too. Now, all of them would come in this navy blue, and obviously the Confederates more commonly would wear gray or brown or tan or a different variation of that. But the Union Army was fairly unified in the fact that all of the coats were in this same color. Now, like I said, this coat has 4 buttons, but again, it's not the only style that could be worn. The other, also very common with the Iron Brigade style coat, would be the frock coat. And that goes down to about knee level, and it would have 9 buttons on the front, and it would also have a lot more blue piping and different things on the sleeves. It was just a much fancier version of this same coat. And if you had one, you would wear that when you were being inspected by a higher general or even the president, for instance. That's when you would bring out that coat. But for standard battle and camp life, this coat would be the most common thing that you wear. Now, it does have a breast pocket on the inside, just on the left. Anything can be stored in there, papers, personal belongings. You hear a lot of stories of soldiers who may have had a picture or something right here, and the bullet makes contact with it and actually ends up saving their life. That's where this breast pocket comes in. It was very common for that to happen. Now, underneath this, I have a cotton shirt on, and that was just standard issue from the military. Everything I'm wearing right here would be standard issue to you. None of this stuff would come from home unless it was special sent from home where you requested or brought it with you. But this cotton shirt is just standard military issue. It is long sleeve. There's Nothing real that special about it. It's just a cotton undershirt. You just have it there so this itchy wool doesn't make direct contact with your skin all the time. And then, I'm not sure how well the camera's going to pick these up, but I do have sky blue trousers on. Now, the most common Union soldier would wear sky blue trousers. However, there were the dark navy blue trousers that were available to you as well. Different soldiers, I know specifically the Navy would have worn those, and then some other different soldiers, I mean, you could just get a hold of them. It just depends. If that was issued to your unit, then you would wear those. It really depends. Or if you rip your sky blue trousers and that's all that's available, you may end up with that. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, but it's just possible. That's another possibility for the soldiers. So I'll button the coat back up here. And then there's one more aspect to the uniform we will talk about, and is the most complained about aspect from every soldier out there. Now, that would be the brogans. And that's these right here. Obviously I'm not wearing them because it's really hard for you guys at home to see them if they're on my feet. So I'm just going to hold them up and show them to you this way. And they are very simply and very cheaply constructed. They are made of leather on the top, leather shoelaces, and the sole is a piece of wood. And that's it. There's nothing else. You might get a thin strip of leather on the inside if you're lucky. These have no comfort whatsoever at all. So they are just hardwood on the bottom. There's nothing special about them. They do have the heel plates on them to hopefully help with traction a little bit. Other than that, some could be sewn soles, like they would be sewn together with the leather. Others would be nailed or pegged in. It just depended on the maker. Every soldier would be issued a pair of these. They also aren't very durable, so you'd often lose them. I can remember one story from the Battle of Stones River, which was in Tennessee, and they actually complained about not having shoes. And if you ever go to Stones River, read about it, you would understand why. It's a very rocky terrain. So I mean, I just showed you how terrible these shoes are and how horribly uncomfortable they are, but it was better than nothing. And a lot of times Confederates had no shoes whatsoever. So they had nothing. So we were actually the more fortunate when we got to wear these and got these shipped in more commonly. So that's all there is to talk about with the shoes. We'll set those out of the way. And then next, we're going to start moving into some of the items that soldier would not necessarily be wearing, but he would be carrying with him everywhere he went. So first we'll talk about items that had to do with food or with eating. And that, all of those items would be stored in a bag that is called the haversack. So we'll take a look at that. This haversack is just made out of tarred canvas, and then it has a shoulder strap on it so that it can be hung over your side. Now the haversack was always hung on the left side. We'll get into that more later, but no matter what handedness you had before you joined the Army, you had to be right-handed to be in the Army. Everything is done from loading to carrying your rifle to it's just all done with your right hand. So that was the reason, since the haversack is only important for eating and it's just there, you're not using it when you're on the march or when you're in battle, it gets hung on the left side because that's considered the non-dominant side and less important side. But now, like I said, this was used for food storage or cooking utensil storage or all of the above, depending on how much you could fit in there. So we'll take a look. I'll open this up and show you guys what I have inside. So the first thing is this little tiny skillet. Now it's fairly uncommon to find a soldier that would be carrying his own skillet. Normally you'd have a camp cook, but it is also not impossible. You could purchase your own skillet from the sutler or have a family member send you one from home. It doesn't matter, but it is possible. So I've obviously used this quite a few times to cook in camp. It's made of cast iron, as everything would have been at that point. So not very common to find a soldier with one of these, but it is possible. Next thing we'll talk about is their eating utensils. Now this tool is a spoon, you can see there, but it also has a fork feature, and we'll fold that back in, and it also has a knife feature all in one. Now you might ask, why wouldn't you just carry those utensils separately or by themselves? Well, the real deal with that is that they break easily, they're easy to get lost when they're not all put together in one compact little thing like this would be. And every time I show this to a group of people, they are like, there's no way that existed. But actually, when I went to Gettysburg to view the museum there, they have some of these on display that they found from soldiers. So they aren't just reproduced or used for today's modern use. They were actually carried among the soldiers, and they just made everything so much easier. There is no name for it. Some guys, I've heard a couple people call it the sporcula. I don't really know why, but that's just one name that goes for it, so that's what I'm going with. So that's that. And then the next thing that might be carried in there, this is more of a personal item than a food item, But during the Civil War, they had some very, very crude forms of painkillers that you could get a hold of. So that's what's carried inside a small metal tin like this. It's nothing special. It's just a little disc tin. So it's something that you could see that's carried along with a soldier in his haversack. And then the last thing that's in here that I'll pull out is a tin plate. Nothing too special about that. It could be stamped with US on the bottom. This one isn't. But it would just be obviously used for eating, and then soldiers would carry it with them. The other very common thing is a canteen half. It's just like half of a canteen, so it's like a round disc, and it could be used as a plate or a bowl. I'll show you the canteen in a little bit. That's not the style plate that I have, but it is one that was very, very common during the Civil War as well. So I'm just going to repack a couple of these things, and then we'll move on. So like I said, haversack was used for all food items, and it was carried on the soldier's left side, which is their non-dominant side. So it's just there. They usually would use it when they get back to camp. Now there's a couple other food items I didn't show you because they're attached to the outside of the haversack. One of those being this tin cup right here. Obviously, soldiers, coffee was a very common thing. They'd all make a big pot together and then share. So you'd want to have your own coffee mug. These actually could be military issued or they could be brought from home. Again, it didn't matter, but this is just one thing that would be added to that food kit. Now, one other thing, this is another cooking component outside of that skillet. This is what they would call a mucket, and there's a reason for that. You can see it's got a handle here that makes it a mug, and then it has another handle here that makes it more like a bucket. So now it's used for both features. A very common thing that soldiers would do is in the morning before they went on the march or went off into a battle is they would put water and then their rice and their pork or anything that if you soak it, it cooks faster on the campfire later that night, so you have more instant gratification and you can eat sooner after a really long day of work. So they would put that stuff in here, then they would use this mucket feature to hang it on their belt or on their haversack, and it would slosh around and soak in there and do that stuff all day. And then when they got it back, they could lower it down into the campfire and it would cook. And then this handle made it really easy to pull it out of the campfire. Now you can use it as a mug, however I do not recommend it with that large of a portion. It's not easy. You have to be very careful, especially with hot liquids. It's not a lot of fun if you spill on yourself with one of those. But that was the use of the mucket, and those were again a very common tool, and again military issued. That's where they got, and then all of these nicknames I'm telling you are things that soldiers came up with on the fly. None of this stuff was issued with a name, they just came up with it as they kept going. So that concludes our list for food supplies, and then next we're going to move into personal items, which would be carried in this backpack-like thing that is called the knapsack. Now I call it a backpack-like thing because you wore it on your back, and that's where you would carry it, and it holds your items such as a tent, spare clothing, spare rope, sewing kit, anything like that. We're going to go through its contents in just a moment. So I'll get this opened up here. But like I said, you'd wear it across your back like a backpack so that it stayed out of the way of all your other stuff on your sides if you had to jump into battle quickly or anything like that. So I've got it open. It has two portions. It folds into it folds up like a book basically. It has a suitcase portion and it has just like a regular box portion. Laying right on the inside, I have a reproduction period newspaper. I forget the date on this one, but this is just something I have, and it'd be very, very common to see soldiers with newspapers because they get their mail, they can pay for a newspaper, anything like that, and they want to know what's going on in different parts of the country. You know, if they're in the East, they want to know what's going on in the Western theater, and that's where newspapers came in. They were a very good resource. I'll put that over there. And then in the box portion of the knapsack, I will hold it up here for just a second. In the box portion, I just have my wool issued soldier's blanket folded up right inside here. I'm not going to take it out because it's kind of a pain to get it back in, so I won't take it out right now. But it would be quite a large blanket, big enough to cover even myself. I'm 6'4", and it actually is big enough for me. It'd be gray wool that was standard and just like what would come from the military. It's military issue, and it would have a U.S. logo and stripe across the bottom. And that's how the blanket would look. The next part we'll go into is the suitcase portion. Like I said, this can be used for any personal effects, extra clothes, books, sewing kits, candles, whatever. The first thing I have in here is a military vest, and this is not something I'm wearing at the moment, but this is again in that navy blue. So this is the vest, and like I said, sorry, I screwed that up. It wouldn't be issued to any private or anything of a lower rank. You could buy one though, that's the thing. It was only issued to your higher ranks, your generals, maybe a captain might get one for free, But if you want one as a lower rank, you're going to have to pay for it. It's kind of almost like a dress effect, so that if you're a captain and you take your coat off, you still look professional wearing this vest. So that was pretty much the use for the vest. I just happened to have one. We'll set that over there. The next thing I have in here is just a standard camp journal. Leather cover, pages. I haven't actually written anything in this, I don't think, yet. But it's pretty basic, pretty standard. Any soldier could have this. Not issued though. It could be sent from home, could be bought from the quartermaster. But that's one very cool thing about the Civil War, is that we have the diaries of many soldiers and are able to tell what they were going through at that time because of their accounts kept in these journals. So it's very good to have one of those. The next thing we'll look at is this. This is what we call just a poke sack. It's just a tiny little cloth bag that could hold anything, snacks, candles. This one, on the other hand, has a sewing kit in it. If I can get it to come out here. It just has a little sewing kit, which I'll unfold. Now usually this would be just rolled up into like a little ball or a little roll. And now it has, you probably can't see them with the camera because it probably doesn't pick them up, but it has pins and safety clothespins. It has, in here, it has little patches of cloth and string that's apparently stuck to that. It does have a mini pair of scissors with it, and then it does have a supply of extra buttons. Now, the really important thing for this is because you're on the fly. If you rip something, there's no Walmart down the street so you can go buy new clothing for yourself. You're going to have to fix it by yourself. And a lot of soldiers, you wouldn't see the quartermaster for weeks, months, whatever. It doesn't matter. You may not see them for a little while. So you need this sewing kit. Now, soldiers started to get these and they're not issued. So they started to develop a nickname for them, and that would be the housewife. When it's all rolled up, it's just this little kind of buttoned up thing, but it's a sewing kit. When you're at home, traditionally, the wife works in the house. She makes all of the clothing. She does all the sewing, all the patching. So the wives would send these soldiers these so that they could manage to sew up their own holes or anything like that. And that's where the nickname the housewife came from, because it was very commonly something that they would do. We'll put that back in here. And then we'll go on to the next item. Like I said, extra rope, very common thing, just to have it in there. You never know what you might need it for. Pitching your tent, setting up another makeshift shelter, doesn't matter. But you want to have some extra rope. And then I'll grab another one of our poke sacks that we just talked about. And we'll unbutton that. This has matches. And then along with those matches, it has wax candles that are kept inside the bag. So, like I said, personal items are what you would find in the knapsack most commonly. And then the other things outside of that would be maybe your tent and your blanket. And that just about wraps up the knapsack for us. So I'm going to get this button back up and then we'll continue. Put the button up. I'll set it over here for now. Now we're going to move on to pieces that were more integral to battle, or what would be known as, for a soldier, field gear. So if you're going into battle and let's say, I don't know, it's a warm day or something like that, you're going to obviously want your canteen. You're going to want to have plenty of water. Now, a lot of things that I've seen from people, or the most common misconception I guess I could say that I see, is that canteen color matters as to what side of the military you're on. It has nothing to do with that. A lot of people think that a blue covered canteen means, oh, you must be a Union soldier, and a gray covered canteen must mean that I'm a Confederate soldier. That's not true. It's just a misconception. Canteens could be covered with anything. And now, they were usually about the size of a quart, so they would hold about a quart of water. Very, very important, especially in battles like Gettysburg, which was in early July on the East Coast. Very humid, very warm. It was not easy for those soldiers, so having water was huge. Very, very big deal. Now, it's just covered with a wool covering, just like the uniform's made out of. And the nice thing about that is soldiers found out that if you dipped the whole canteen in water and got the wool wet, it actually acted as like a mini cooler for the inside of the canteen. It would keep it cold for some time. So that's just another military trick that soldiers figured out. And then it just has a leather carrying strap. Now this would also go on the left side because it's in the non-dominant hand, but it goes over top of the haversack because this is more important for you to get to at any time than it is to get to your food items. You'd want to get to this first. Now, when you go into battle, the things I just showed you, your haversack and your knapsack, you don't bring with you. Those get left back at the campsite. Or if you're marching somewhere and you're carrying all that stuff, you would drop it and leave it where the battle starts and then go into fighting. You wouldn't carry all that heavy stuff with you because it's just a burden. However, the canteen would always come with you because you always need water. So that's all there is for that. And the next thing we'll talk about all has to do with the firearms. So the first thing I'm going to hold up here is the military issue leather belt. And this is what that looks like. It has the US plated belt buckle, very, very common to see one of those. And it's just leather, it just goes around the waist. I'm not going to put it on right now, but it just goes kind of around your stomach, a little bit higher than a usual waist belt because you want it to be seen. In the US, obviously, it's just another term of identification. Now, the important part about this belt is it holds two things. It holds this right here, which is your cap pouch, which is integral to the process of loading and firing the weapons that were used during the Civil War, which again we'll get to later, we'll get to shortly. So in here it would hold percussion caps, which are these tiny little, you probably can't see this from all the way back there, but that's kind of how big it is if you can get the representation. They're little brass caps that are filled with fulminated mercury, and when you strike them with an object it creates a spark, and that would ignite the powder that's in the barrel. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So we'll put that back in there. That was just made out of leather. Now the most important thing I'm going to continue to talk about here is that it has one pouch that I can fold open and then a second one. And that was very important for weather protection because with any black powder weapon, which is everything that they used, if you get any of that stuff wet, it becomes useless. Now, I said the belt holds two things, so it holds your cap pouch. And then the other thing that it holds is the scabbard and the bayonet that goes on the end of the gun. Now, this is a triangular bayonet, and we'll talk about why those were outlawed in just a few minutes after the Civil War. Set that down. The next thing we'll talk about is the cartridge box, and this would hold all of the ammunition for your rifle. Now, you've been wondering probably this whole time, he keeps talking about stuff that goes on the left side, so what goes on the right? Well, that's where this comes in. You load with your right hand, you do everything you do as a soldier with your right hand. So, your cartridge box, which you need to load your rifle, goes on the right hand side. And that's why I continue to talk about that and how important it is. So this has a shoulder strap, it has the eagle breastplate button, again just another identifier that you are a Union soldier, and just to show, I guess, American pride of sorts. You know, they wanted to symbolize where they were from and where they came from. And then it has another US plate here on the front flap of the cartridge box. Again, one big flap and then a second flap. And then on the inside it just has two metal tins that would be filled full of cartridges. And then right here on the front it has a little pouch that could be used for tools or cleaning materials or anything like that. So now, what might you ask, what would be held inside of a cartridge box like this? Well, I've got one here that I'll show you. They would hold these little paper tubes just like this. And these would hold the black powder and a .58 caliber Minet ball. Those were made of lead. So when they would hit a bone or anything in the body, they would shatter the bone and then smush up into a small little chunk, I guess I should say, of lead. And they were very, very lethal and also just dangerous. But that was what would be put in here. Now they're called a Minet ball because they were kind of the first bullet form that was used in military warfare. Before that, they're literally just using a steel ball. This is where we start to see more of the cone shape come to fruition, and then more of the grooves in the bullet to be able to work with the rifling inside the barrels. This is the first time we're going to start seeing rifled muskets in military warfare. So they would be held inside these paper tubes with the Minet ball and powder, and then when it came time to load, you would draw one with your right hand out of your cartridge box, tear off this little tab here that I flipped up with your teeth, and then dump all the contents into the barrel of the rifle. And then you use the ramrod, and I'll go over loading procedure in just a couple minutes, and you use the ramrod to tamp all that down. Now, like I just said, you would rip that tab off with your teeth. One very important thing for the soldiers is that you had to have 4 good teeth, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, to be able to rip a cartridge open. If you didn't have good teeth, they wouldn't take you because you needed to be able to rip a cartridge open. That was a big deal. Now, they would get these cartridges from the arsenals or from the quartermaster or whatever in arsenal packs, which came in packs of 10, these little pieces of paper that were just wrapped up with a piece of string, and then it would just hold 10 cartridges. So they would stuff their cartridge box full of these and then unpack them before they went into battle and stuff all the cartridges in there. So these are very, very common, and that's how the cartridges themselves would be administered to the soldiers. Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the rifle. This rifle that I have here is an 1861 model Springfield. These were made by the Springfield Armory, which started its contract with the U.S. military in 1795. They began making flintlock rifles. This style is a cap-lock rifle, which were the most common during the Civil War and some of the wars prior. So, like I said, this is a Springfield model, but there were actually two different very, very common models, and are probably the ones you would hear of the most if you watched other videos or read books about the Civil War. You'd hear about the Springfield, and then the other one you would hear about is the Enfield, which is actually a British model rifle. Now the difference is between the Enfield and this one. They had a very slight difference in caliber. This was thought of as a 58 caliber or .58. Enfield was thought of as a 5.77, so a 57. I don't even know how to say that. A .577 caliber would be the caliber of an Enfield. So that was one very minute difference between the two. The other very noticeable differences is Enfields commonly would have a blued barrel instead of just steel, so it would look much darker. It'd be just a different color. That did prevent rusting, so that was very, very helpful. The other thing is if I put this on half cock, which we'll discuss what that means in just a moment, the cone right here, which is where that percussion cap I discussed earlier gets placed, it goes at a 45-degree angle. On an Enfield, it goes more straight down. So here what's being forced to happen is when you strike that percussion cap with this hammer, it creates a spark. In a Springfield, the spark has to bounce and then light the powder on fire to fire the rifle. In an Enfield, it was more direct, so the spark didn't have to bounce, it just went directly to the powder. So Springfields were a lot more likely to misfire, especially after lots and lots of use. So now that we've talked about Rolf rifles, we'll talk about what this rifle looks like, what the different components are, and how to load it. So the first thing is we'll look at the cone right here, which has a hole in it. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see that on the camera, but this is where the percussion caps that I discussed earlier will go. And the thing that strikes that cone is this hammer. Now, you've probably heard the phrase before, never go off half cock. And that means that basically, if I sit here and I pull this trigger right now, this hammer will not go forward. Half cock is pretty much the safety for the rifles at this point. And it's where you would do all of your loading procedures to stay safe and try to ensure that the rifle doesn't go off in your face when you're trying to load it. And we'll talk about that in just a moment too. Now, when the command ready is given, which is when you would aim and be prepared to fire, be completely loaded, then you would pull it back to full cock, and if I pulled the trigger now, it would strike that percussion cap, which would create a spark, and ignite the powder, which after you load your weapon is seated right here at the end of this barrel. And that would be the use for the ramrod, but again, we'll discuss that in just a moment. So I'm going to lower the hammer back down safely. The next thing we'll talk about at this end of the rifle is the sights. So the basic sight is this little ridge here in the barrel you can see on the camera, hopefully. The basic sight like this was said to be good up to about 100 yards. That's what it was said to be. Now, this has flip-up levels, so if I flip that up, now it's a little bit taller. Hopefully you can see that little piece sticking out, hopefully. That was said to be good up to about 300 yards. And then this last one, which stands up even taller, was said to be good up to about 500 yards. Were any of those accurate? Absolutely not. None of them were even close. So we'll fold those back down, and then you would line up those front sights or those back sights I should say, with this front notch on the very end of the barrel. So that's how you would fire one of these weapons when it was time to actually aim at the enemy and shoot. Now these were very advanced for this time. They were called a rifled musket rather than just a musket. And the difference is the inside of the barrel. With a standard old musket, they were smooth on the inside of the barrel. They had no surface. It was just the smooth steel like it was on the outside. But by the time they got to about 1855, they came up with what was called rifling. And it's basically grooving on the inside of a barrel of a rifle. And it makes it so that when the bullet exits, or when the bullet travels down the barrel, it spins the entire time. So the bullet is spinning and therefore goes on more of a straight target rather than just being thrown out the end of the barrel and going anywhere possible. So rifling was very, very important, and it allowed soldiers to fight from distances further away. They hadn't quite figured that out yet in the Civil War, which is why it's one of the bloodiest and most deadly wars on American soil, and still is to this day. It's because even though they had the rifling, they didn't quite understand what that would change yet. Not at that point. So now that we talked about the features of the gun, let's talk about loading the gun. So they were taught a 9 times loading procedure. Now the first thing, before they went even into this loading procedure, they'd be in the field of battle, but you're not just going to be dragging your rifle across the ground, you've got to have a carry position. So what they would be taught to carry it would be called shoulder arms. And now the Iron Brigade, which practiced Baxter's manual, it's just a different manual name, Shoulder arms would look much like this. You would carry the gun on the bottom of the stock, and then it would be on your left hand shoulder. Now earlier I said the hat is folded up on the left hand side for a certain reason, and it's so that you don't bonk your head off of this barrel the entire time, and that it doesn't run in or ruin the brim of your hat. So that was the key purpose for folding up that side of the hat, is so that this carry could be executed easily and not have any obstructions or issues or anything like that. So the command would be given to load. So you would take your gun with your right hand and lower it down in between your feet. Your feet would be placed at a V, and you'd have the gun in front of you, tipped outward. Now, the reason for that is maybe you just fired and the gun's still very hot. There could be a little discharge of powder. Maybe the gun misfired, you didn't even realize because there's so many other people around you shooting at the same time. So the bullet could still be in there could still be powder in there. If that blows up in your face, the effects are going to be very, very negative. So you want to have it leaned out. Now, I've continuously talked about why everything else goes on your left side and why just the cartridge box goes on your right side. You load with your right hand, so you want to be able to reach your ammunition with your right hand. So the command load would be given. You'd reach into that cartridge box and you'd pull out one of those little paper tubes, flip the tab up with your thumb, bite it off, dump the powder down the barrel as carefully as you can so that, again, you don't get your hand with whatever might be left in there. And then you would seat the bullet, the little Minet ball, you would seat that in the end of the barrel with your thumb. Next, you would have to pull out the ramrod. Now, I don't want to hit the ceiling in here, so I'm going to lean the gun out just a little bit and flip the ramrod over. So then this ramrod at the end is shaped conically like the bullet, like the tip of the Minet ball would be with that little cone at the top. So that would just make it easier for ramming. So then you would put that in. You could guide it in with your thumb if you needed to. I'm just going to lean it so I don't hit the ceiling. And then you would drive it and pack everything all the way down in the end of the barrel. And then you would pull the rammer back out, flip it back over, hopefully without hitting the guy next to you so he doesn't yell at you. It happens. And then you would reseat it with your thumb and drive it all the way back in. And then you would take your thumb on the other side of the barrel and push it down. Again, trying to reduce the chance that you put your thumb over the opening of the barrel and risk losing it. You don't want to lose your thumbs. They're definitely an important part. Now, next, you're going to pull the rifle up to about chest height, and then right under here, with your belt on, would be your cap pouch. So you're going to put it on half cock, which is the safety, and then you would take the cap pouch out of there and seat it on this cone. Now, you're ready to fire. If you've already fired, you're going to immediately put your feet into a T and go to the ready position. If you have not fired yet, then you would go back to shoulder arms on this half cock position so that you're safe. But if you've already fired, like I said, let's just think we've already fired. So we'd go to the ready position without hitting lights on the ceiling. So we'd go to the ready position, and then when the command aim was given, you would pull the hammer back the rest of the way, and then shoulder the weapon like this with your hand very close, because you have to be able to support the weight of this rifle for long periods of time. Maybe you're waiting for the enemy to come and you're going to surprise them, so you want to be prepared when they get there. So you want to have your hand back, and when the command fire is given, you would fire. So that was the 9 times loading procedure that was continuously drilled into soldiers. They, in fact, got to the point where they hated it because it was drilled into them so often. Now, however, a well-trained soldier could fire up to 3 shots in a minute. That's 1 for every 20 seconds. That would be everything I just showed you in 20 seconds. That's very, very fast and very, very well done. You gotta be pretty good and pretty well talented at that. Now, that's how you fire when you're at far combat. What if you get charged, or what if you're the person charging? You gotta have another tool, and that's where the bayonet comes in, which I showed you all earlier, and it can be attached to the end of the rifle. So we'll pull out the bayonet here. Now, we'll seat that on the end of the gun, and then it kind of just sits down over that front sight nub that I showed you earlier, and then it has a little latch where it latches in. And now it is side mounted that you can see, so that you could fire with it on. Although when I look at it, it almost kind of looks like the bayonet bends over, so I'm not really sure how safe that was. But it was equipped so that you could do that, and that's the reason for the side mount. Now, the very important thing about this bayonet, I'm going to take it back off, is that it is triangular. That is the shape of the blade. You may not be able to see that very well with the camera, but it has 3 sides to it. Now, these were actually outlawed after the Civil War. You were no longer allowed to use these in any form of warfare after the Civil War. And there's a reason for that. A triangular wound into someone's body is so impossible to stitch. They often became infected, people bled out, because it's just so hard to stitch a triangle wound. Most people are used to stitching a standard like straight edge knife wound. A triangular wound was just so impossible to try to stitch that it was actually outlawed in warfare because it ended the lives of so many different people. So it was no longer allowed to be used after the Civil War. That was the last war where a triangular bayonet was allowed. So we'll set that down. I'm actually going to set the gun down because the bayonet, while it was very commonly used for warfare, and like I just said, it caused pretty gruesome wounds, there were other uses for it in camp for the soldiers outside of fighting their enemies. So I'm going to set the rifle down for just a second, and then we'll go over the other uses of the bayonet. So now I showed you guys the mucket quite a while ago now, but it has this nice handle on it, and like I said, that makes it easy to lift it up off the fire. Well, soldiers started to figure out as they spent more and more time in camp that the bayonet makes a pretty good handle when it comes to trying to pick up your mucket. So you can actually hang that little wire on the end of it, and it's very, very useful when it comes to trying to pick something up that's very hot off the fire and set it off to the side. Other uses that it could have. It was usually sharp on the end. If you had a close friend who also wanted to dry his socks or his shirt, you could stab each of your bayonets into two trees that were close to each other and make sort of a clothesline, and then hang your clothing or anything over it that may have been wet or just needed to be aired out or dried out. And then after that, other uses for it, it has this pretty large end so that it can fit down over the barrel. Soldiers also figured out that they could stamp or drive the bayonet into the ground outside their tent, put a candle in the end of it, and they'd have a makeshift candle holder. Now, it's a lot easier than carrying an actual candle holder because at that time they were usually made of glass. And I mean, imagine trying to fit a glass candle holder into that bag and not break it. So this was really, really useful in holding a candle. Now the only problem is there's no wax all over the whole thing, so you gotta be a little bit careful with that and make sure that it still fits on your gun at the end of the day. But it was very common for soldiers to use this as a candle holder as well. So not only was it used for combat, it also had many, many other uses in the soldier's life. And with that, that is all I have for you guys today. That's all I'm able to show you since we're at an inside format. If we could do this outside, I would probably have my tent set up. Soldiers during the Civil War would sleep in a dog tent, which was made of canvas. Each soldier would carry half of it. It would be buttoned together at the top of the tent and then be in like a V shape basically. And you would share that with one, maybe two, maybe more other soldiers. You know, they would squeeze into it. They aren't very big. They're actually very, very small, but you have to be able to carry them in that backpack and take them on the go with you. So then they could be set up with sticks or anything that you could find in the area. Lots of soldiers would make lean-tos. They're actually called shebangs out of them, off of a fence or a low-hanging branch or anything like that. Lots of different things could be done with the tent. So I can't show you that today, unfortunately. The other thing that's in there is what's called a ground cloth. It's canvas on one side and tarred on the other. That's your layer between you and the ground at night. You lay that down, the tar goes down, the canvas lays up, and you lay on the canvas. It'd just be that little layer between frost, water, whatever, bugs, whatever might else be crawling underneath you or moving underneath you. It'd keep you a little bit more dry at night. And I have one of those in over there too, but obviously it's kind of hard to show those things today since we're at an inside environment. So with that, you've basically seen everything that the very common Civil War soldier would carry with him in camp and learned hopefully as much as you can about that. So thank you very much for taking your time to watch, and I hope that you learned something today. Thanks.